Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that Angela Walker and I ran on. And if you look over I guess for you, it's the right shoulder, the left shoulder, whatever, different banner up, not the presidential campaign banner, but Hawkins for governor. As I've mentioned, if you've been on the last week or two, that I got the designation from the Green Party of New York, and shortly I'll have on to share with us my running mate, Gloria Mattera, who's running for lieutenant governor. And if you look at the slogan there, this was a 2010 banner, and you can see tax Wall Street, invest in Main Street. 2010, we were coming out of the Great Recession. So that was a big issue. And that's when we were talking about, we were the first candidates to run on a Green New Deal. And even though when I ran for president, they were calling me the original Green New Dealer, and we documented that. Actually, Gloria was also one of the original Green New Dealers. So we're running here in New York State as the original Green New Dealers, because that's where this whole slogan got started. So we started petitioning on Tuesday, April 19th. We have 42 days until May 31st to get 45,000 signatures. And that is, from the research I've done, the hardest ballot access standard in the United States of any of the states. And in fact, it's harder than any country I can find. And I think I've mentioned here before, but just briefly, the best way to compare this country to other countries is to look at what it takes to run as an independent for the national legislature, because a lot of countries don't have directly elected executives. They have parliamentary systems. So the executive comes out of a parliamentary coalition that has the majority. So if you do that comparison, to run for the House of Representatives as an independent varies by state. New York's 3,500. Illinois is over 15,000. Georgia's over 20,000. Alabama's over 30,000. Indiana's over 40,000. But you go to other countries, you want to run as an independent for the House of Commons in the UK, it's 10 signatures. For the unicameral parliament in New Zealand, it's 2 signatures. It's 100 in Australia. It's 100 in Canada, unless you're in a rural riding. That's what they call their districts, ridings. It's 50 signatures. It's 200 in Germany. And that's typical. The worst I found was Russia. You want to run as an independent for the State Duma from one of their 85 constituencies. It's 15,000 signatures in 45 days. Now that's close to the old standard in New York. Instead of 45,000, it was 15,000 in 42 days. So the Greens have been shopping around a bill to Democratic legislators saying, we need to get back to the old standard to have some semblance of fairness in ballot access. And I've been joking with them that we just want to get back to the Putin standard. And they laugh, and they mostly say we're right. And then they say, but I don't know if we want to put that in there till after the election because we don't want to anger the governor, who's a Democrat, Kathy Hochul. So the petitioning has been going well. Most people, my pitch is, can you help us out with a signature to put the Green Party back on the ballot? And most people don't know we lost the ballot line. The law that changed it, Governor Cuomo, the now disgraced former governor, rammed through as an attachment to the budget package in April 2020 when we were locked down with COVID. And didn't get a lot of attention, but it did knock us off the ballot in the 2020 presidential election. They tripled the number of signatures we have to get, more than tripled the number of votes we need to get. They doubled the frequency from the governor's race every 4 years to president, governor, president every 2 years. They quintupled the number of signatures we got to get in congressional districts in a distribution requirement from 100 to 500. And, it's designed to keep us off the ballot. And as we point out that party suppression is a form of voter suppression. It's what authoritarian governments do. And it's what the Democrats are doing. We all know what the Republicans are doing with the suppression of voter rights and taking over election administration so they can steal elections. But the Democrats are not doing too well either when it comes to ballot access. New York is probably the worst, but there are other states like Nevada where they passed a law making it harder to get on a ballot. And according to Richard Winger at Ballot Access News, that was aimed at the Green Party in Nevada. And the Democrats want to keep them off. And that's, that's about as authoritarian as you can get to suppress a political party. And the other thing I'll just note is everybody's, noticing gerrymandering, big issue. Here in New York, it wasn't the Republicans, it was the Democrats. And in fact, while they did approve the gerrymandered districts for the state legislature, the congressional districts have been held up in the courts. So we have to get a distribution requirement on our petition, and we're not sure what the congressional districts are going to be. So that's putting us at a disadvantage, one more. So we got real challenges here, but everybody's out. I've been talking to people today all over the state, been out petitioning. I went to a farmer's market. I got 120 signatures in 3 hours, which is about as fast as people can write. And I had 2 petitions going. So we're going to do our best. And let's bring on Gloria Matera, who's my running mate. As I said, she was the original Green New Dealer. And just to say a few words about Gloria, we ran together in 2010 when the Greens didn't have a ballot line, and we got the ballot line. So I had other running mates in 2014 and 2018, but now we got Gloria again, and we're going to try to get that ballot line back under even more difficult circumstances. And Gloria's been working in the public hospital system for many years. She's a longtime activist for expanded and improved Medicare for all. And we have a bill here in New York called New York Health. Maybe we can talk about that, because once the Democrats got power, they couldn't get the power, use the power to get it passed, even though they promised that. She's been a board member, is a board member of the New York City Metro chapter of Physicians for a National Health Program. She's been active for decades. She was secretary of the New York chapter of the Labor Party that was spearheaded by Tony Mazzocchi, for those of you old enough to remember that effort. And when she got involved with the Green Party in 2001, she ran for city council against somebody y'all have heard of, Bill de Blasio, who became the mayor of New York. And that first run, she got 10%. She ran against him again 2 years later, 2003, got nearly 20%. And then in 2005, she ran for Brooklyn Borough president over a development issue, what's now the Barclays Center. And she received 7% each time she got matching funds. So those were really high profile campaigns, and really brought the Greens to attention in Brooklyn and New York City. And she's a longtime eco-socialist activist with groups like System Change, Not Climate Change, and the Green Eco-Socialist Network. So Gloria, thanks for coming on. And why don't you tell us more about yourself and the issues we're running on, and take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Howie. It's great to be on. It's like, hi, everyone. It's like getting the band back together, you and I. So I'm really honored to run. Howie has been a mentor and a comrade and a friend to me a long time, even before the Green Party knew of Howie and, followed his politics. So just a little bit more. Howie gave me a great introduction. So you kind of got a little snippet of my kind of, political trajectory. But connected to that, I started out as a special ed teacher. I'm a native Brooklynite, lived here my whole life. So all my work has been in New York City, public services, education. After that, I moved into a discipline called Child Life, where I'm working in public hospital. Been there for over 30 years. And that really soon after going into the public hospital system and seeing that, the mission of public health is so important, and the community, caring for the community, involving the community around these public hospitals. And no matter how good the healthcare would be, and the hospital I worked in, lots of good support social services, you just saw what the, for-profit system, the health insurance system, the leaving out of undocumented families, many of which use the services in public hospitals, that there was something terribly wrong. with this. And when I realized that is really kind of came upon Physicians for a National Health Program, which is a national organization. They have a very vibrant chapter here in New York City that had been advocating for, expanded, improved Medicare for all, single payer, lots of different ways of talking about it. But basically, one of my mentors in PNHP just said it easily. It's like everybody in, nobody out. Doesn't matter. And so that really made me become politically active. And people might remember back in the 90s when the Clintons talked about healthcare reform, that ended up just being another service to the insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies. And then I started to understand that, well, this is not going to happen. This change for what people need for health justice, it's not going to happen if we have the same political system, winner take all, two corporate parties, beholden to war and Wall Street. And that really got me involved in independent political electoral work with the Labor Party. And then, early on 2001 and currently today with the Green Party. So I've been co-chair of the Green Party of New York. I've been a recent co-chair of the National Party. And here I am running for lieutenant governor, definitely on the Green New Deal. It's our new and improved Green New Deal. We look every time, and then really hats off to Howie and the team that he works with, coming up with what the Green New Deal stays in its, essence and its foundation, right, around public ownership, around sustainability, creating jobs and preserving the planet. And all the species on there, but looking each time to say, because the onslaught, from the corporations, the onslaught from the 1%, from the empire gets harder and harder. And that's why we have to keep coming back with the solutions that really mean something to people.
Okay, let's talk about some of the key issues here in New York State. In my introduction, I didn't, and I meant to talk about, we have a huge problem with corruption. Mm-hmm. We just had a governor leave. The issue that got the most headlines was sexual predation and harassment of staff. I think equally bad, if not worse, was the fact that he had, as a policy, sending people from hospitals who had COVID back to nursing homes in order to lower the numbers of people dying in the hospitals. Mm-hmm. And what was being reported. And because of that, we've had real carnage in our nursing homes and long-term care facilities in the state. 12% of the people that were living there when the COVID outbreak started are now passed. Mm-hmm. So, but we've lost, we lost Spitzer, Patterson had a big issue with corruption. We lost an attorney general. What was his name? Not just Spitzer, but he's forgettable because he didn't do a whole lot. But
well, we've also, over the years, the speaker, the minority speaker, the majority speaker, Silver.
Yes.
The current lieutenant governor, the most recent lieutenant governor, Brian Benjamin, who was really picked by Kathy Hochul when he was already under a cloud of suspicion. And so, I think what we can say is that the corruption and the shenanigans that go on in New York State politics they're pretty deep and pretty widespread. And of course, we know other states and love to hear from other people too, that similar things go on. But, New York was credited, I think, a few years back to have one of the most dysfunctional state legislatures in the nation. And so that's what we're fighting. And, they've gotten to know that Howie, in particular, because he's been a candidate for governor, for several times, getting our ballot line, renewed each time. But the Green Party in New York in general, continues to come up with the kinds of solutions that are really important, that we keep pushing back. Our candidates will speak on issues that no one else is speaking about, whether it's pushing for the New York Health Act, real criminal justice reform, legalizing and decriminalizing cannabis, and that this was an attempt basically to suppress what is truly the left radical, revolutionary party here in New York, right? And so, getting rid of the Green Party the Democrats, the Working Families Party, they can just kind of pretend we lean to the left because that's cover for them to be able to say that when the Green Party is being suppressed. But right now, as Howie said, we have hats off to my Green comrades who are out today on a beautiful Saturday, Earth Day, Earth weekend, getting signatures, because it's going to be a monumental task. But you can help us with that because just not today is not just the Earth Day weekend kind of celebrations that are happening, but it's my birthday. And I'm not going to talk about my age really, but I'll just tell you that I got my Medicare card. So this is a special day in many ways, kicking off our petitioning. I'm celebrating my Medicare birthday. And so if people want to think about making a birthday donation, $65 to our petitioning effort, to our campaign to really get the Green Party back on the ballot, you can do that. There's the information right there on the screen. Thank you. HawkinsMatera.org/donate. Not sure, Howie, if we need a specific URL, but we can always circle back to that. Let's just keep talking about the issues.
Yeah, that is the URL. You can put www. in front of it. And if you just go to HawkinsMatera.org, we have a lot of material up on the webpage. But use the /donate because the link to the donate page is not up on the whole web page, at least an hour ago. We're almost there. We've been, working away getting this website together, and it just went live today. So, but the donate page is working, and 65 or any amount, but 65 would be a nice donation. We are hiring petitioners. I mean, to get 45,000 in 42 days, that's that's over 1,000 a day. You really need double that to be safe in New York. The Democrats and Republicans, see, the way it works here, if your party and your recognized party has a convention and designates you, you don't have to get signatures. So Governor Hochul and whoever she picks as the lieutenant governor, because Brian Benjamin, the corrupt one, just had to resign, and he's being indicted for bribery and fraud related to campaign finance. They didn't have to get signatures. Now, if a major party candidate wanted to challenge them in a primary, they had to get 15,000, 1/3 of what we had to get in 42 days. And their petitions, the party petitions were turned in last week, and they're all being challenged by the designated candidate in each party. So, it's very cutthroat here in New York. They always go after the Greens. So, to be safe from challenge, we're really going for 90,000.
Right.
So that $65 or $650 or $6.50, look at your budget and what you can do really will help. And so.
Yeah. So Howie, what's the Green New Deal really mean if we're elected to run New York State? Like what kinds of specific things, let's tell people out there, that would really change, that would really be different? Because, I know from even connecting it to something, talking a little bit about what I talk about is non-reformist reforms, right? Because that's the campaign for New York Health. It's a really important campaign. People should check out. It will be like a single payer system for New York State, no copays, no deductibles. Everybody will be included in that. That's on the road to really, health justice, where you would have, a national health service. We know that state initiatives, or have a certain way of being restricted, right? How are you going to be able to do that? But I think if the more we promote that this is happening right now as a campaign, we think it's a great educational tool for people. It's a great way to move towards that. Because of obviously, when we're talking about what needs to be done in this country is really not just how we pay for healthcare, which is having, the government and the way the Canadian system has been. But at some point, we really have to look at who is controlling that, who is making decisions, because private equity companies are becoming more and more prominent, right? when we talked about single payer in the past, or in the way the Canadians have been doing it, it's the government, will be as the insurer paying out the individual doctors or the individual hospital bill, right? Now, what's happening is really these are becoming corporations, conglomerates of doctors. Most of these places, diagnostic centers, clinics, rehab centers, nursing homes, all owned and private equity companies. And that really is completely devoid of caring about the patient, of doctors making decisions along with their patients.
Yeah, they deny service and increase their profits. And it's not just the insurance system now, it's the whole delivery system, which is why we want not just socialized insurance, but a socialized medical system. And that's, what Angela and I campaigned on. We called for a community-controlled national health service. So what we're saying in New York is pass this insurance program, universal public health care, public health insurance. It's called New York Health. But then we want to move on. And New York, if it was ranked in the world, would be the world's 11th largest economy among the nations of the world, bigger than Russia. What we do in New York matters. And that's true for healthcare, where the Democrats in the state assembly, they started passing a version of this bill in 1992. And they passed it many times. And they kept saying, well, we can't get it through the Senate. We got to get Democratic control of the Senate. Well, they now have a supermajority in the Senate. They got the assembly and they got the governorship. And now the bill can't come out of committee for the last 4 years since they got their majority. That's your Democratic Party for you. They will talk progressive, but when it really comes to doing stuff that would impinge upon corporate interests, they don't, because they're a corporate funded party and that's their bread and butter. And that's why we need the Greens. We were talking about, well, why did they make it harder for the Greens to get on the ballot? And you're right, Gloria, it was because of the Greens. The narrative among the media here is Andrew Cuomo didn't like the Working Families Party because they were critical of him, trying to push him to the left a couple times. One time they challenged him in a primary. The first time they didn't support Zephyr Teachout against Cuomo. And then in the general, they always put Cuomo on the ballot line. So they didn't take anything from him. We got 5% in 2014. And before that, Cuomo was, playing up the fiscal conservative, trying to appeal to Republicans. And we got a big vote because particularly public employees in the state were really angry with Andrew Cuomo. So we got a big vote in the Albany area where the state government's based, a lot of teachers, and at 5%. So then Cuomo, who had wanted to run up the ballot, the vote, get more than his daddy, Mario Cuomo, ever got as governor, more than he got in 2010, he got left. And to compete for that green vote, we had leverage. And Cuomo changed his tune. Now he was the quote unquote pragmatic progressive who gets things done. We got a ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, paid family leave. He made an empty, duplicitous gesture toward tuition-free public college, but he was trying to get those votes. So that's leverage that we can have. Even if we don't win the office, we can move the debate and the policy our way. And just like in healthcare, the first question you asked was, well, what's unique about our Green New Deal? And for us, it was always an eco-socialist program because much of this has to be done through the public sector. And the Democrats took the slogan in 2018, AOC and Markey, and they put in their non-binding resolution for a Green New Deal. And I've talked about this. They watered it down. They left out the ban on fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. They left out the phase out of nuclear power. They left out the cuts to military spending and extended the deadline 20 years from 2030 to 2050 for zero emissions. And then it really wasn't zero emissions. It was net zero, which opened the door to continued burning of fossil fuels with carbon capture and sequestration technologies that don't exist. But even bigger, or as big, is the fact that instead of public power, in our utilities and public manufacturing. So, for example, we can transition the steel industry from coke ovens to blast furnaces heated by green hydrogen and electric arc furnaces for the scrap steel. That's 8% of the world's carbon footprint. Same thing with cement. You got to get to not using carbon carbonate to harden the cement because the carbon, when they heat it up, goes into the atmosphere. That's another 8% of the world's carbon footprint. So these technologies got to change, and you can't do that by offering tax breaks and subsidies and loan guarantees to the private sector, because their business decisions are going to be, we're going to wear out the technology we got before we start a new technology. That's why it's got to go through the public sector. And the Democrats have taken our slogan and distorted it. I mean, we use the World War II analogy. You know, we got to do like the federal government did during World War II when it took over a quarter of manufacturing in the country, to turn industry on a dime into what FDR called the arsenal of democracy, to arm the allies to defeat the fascists. And we need to do nothing less through the public sector to defeat climate change. So what we have in New York is, we had a bill that we helped write called New York Off Fossil Fuels. The competing bill was from the Working Families Party, and it was called, I forget what it was called, but then Cuomo even used the phrase Green New Deal, which was really stretching the phrase. And they came up with a compromise bill called Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which is a much watered down, too slow transition to clean energy. So we bring not just an eco-socialist approach that's needed, but a faster timeline that's in comportment with the climate science. And indicative of the difference, in the bill that passed, it says in the prefatory remarks, our goal is to get to 450 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. That was a standard proposed like around 2005. And the science, James Hansen proposed 350 parts per million. Bill McKibben popularized that. And, you know, that's a much better, safer standard. But this bill that passed uses a standard, but by the time it passed, it was 15 years out of date. So, you know, we're coming here with the climate science and an eco-socialist approach that we're just not getting from the Democrats, including the progressive democratic socialists, or as they call themselves in New York State. So that's why we need the Green Party.
Right. I don't know how, if you have any, if anybody listening has any particular questions. I do think if people are out there, whether they're in New York or, you know, other places, and thinking of running for office as an independent, as an eco-socialist, as a green, you know, I think some of the policies that we've been talking about, even if you're not running for office and you're kind of thinking about organizing as an organizing tool in your communities, I think, you know, Howie, the way you talk about public power, public banks, you know, community land trusts, I think these are really good community issues that either local candidates or people banding together in their communities can really be pushing for, because I think that those are the steps, right? The transitional steps to start getting more power, more democratically controlled decision making in the hands of workers, in the hands of the communities, worker co-ops in the same vein, and, you know, kind of away from this, you know, top down kind of corporate hierarchy.
Yeah, and when it comes to worker co-ops, I mean, the state has a very, like, what's the word, token program to encourage employee ownership. And what we're saying is we should have a state bank with a technical and entrepreneurial department that can actually plan worker co-ops where they're needed. And this is what they did in Mondragon. And then they hire the workers to execute that business plan and train them in cooperative self-management of the business. You need that. I've worked in co-op development, and you just can't expect people, like I worked in construction. I worked in a worker co-op in construction, but most building trades people, they don't know the management side of it, and you can't expect them to. What you can expect them to do is hire their managers, or, you know, vote them in because they elect the board of the firm, or if it's smaller, it's a collective of the workers. And then, of course, they get the full value of the labor, they get the full value of what their labor creates, instead of having, you know, bosses take a big portion away. But those won't, you know, just pop up because people, if you look at the co-ops that are popping up right now, it tends to be, you know, well-educated, college-educated, middle-class people in services or things like restaurants. But in other areas, you know, particularly where there's blue-collar workers, you got to have more technical and financial support. So that's what I think. That's the way we're really going to promote worker co-ops.
Right. I mean, the laws on the books right now in New York, really, what they do is facilitate corporations, you know, to be able to form and proliferate. Right. In fact, there are there's very little legislation that facilitates worker co-ops. I think what, we will be talking about is, flipping that, right? And, providing opportunities, providing incentives, providing resources for more worker co-ops. I want to acknowledge, both Howie and I have, had conversations with Professor Richard Wolff, who talks done a lot of work around democracy in the workplace and workers co-ops. And that's, one of the other things that fits really well into the Green New Deal.
Yeah. For example, in one area where you don't want a big public corporation doing all the retrofitting of buildings, which is, in New York is the biggest carbon contributor. We got to, make them more efficient, retrofit them with heat pumps for heating and cooling, apply solar and wind applications where they're appropriate to the property. That is something that worker co-ops, they can do the work of retrofitting. Doesn't have to be a public corporation, a public enterprise. It can be, private enterprises that are cooperatives. And that's what I did back in the 70s. We didn't know what green jobs were. We were doing them. And we did it as a worker co-op. And so I think that's an area where there's so many jobs to be created in that field. And that's where worker co-ops would be much better than, having contractors hire workers and get most of the money, and the workers just get the wage that the market bears at that point. And we also need to promote union co-ops like the steelworkers are doing, so that particularly in the larger co-ops, the workers are organized to deal with management, even if they hire the management. And, there's an inherent conflict there about, management's got its goals in terms of production. The workers got their goals in terms of living a sane life and being safe at work, and they can be in conflict. So you need a union. And the steelworkers have a whole program around that we support.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't know, maybe if we want to address a lot of things on people's mind now, if you've been getting any comments when you're petitioning, but that, the other thing is, I'll quote, or maybe it's paraphrase, can't remember the exact thing, but the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, his thing is the key to prosperity. So he's talking about obviously a more prosperous, a more equitable New York. And in his mind is, the path to that is public safety. And so I think this is going to be a big topic, both in the gubernatorial race, obviously, and even in some of the local races where, they're just certainly looking here, the bail reform. That could be in danger. The state legislature did fight back a bit, but they've made some changes. They're clearly candidates, the corporate candidates are picking up on running on public safety issues. Where I live down here in New York City, the terrible, horrendous situation that's gone on for years and years at Rikers Island, where no one really can seem to care enough and put the kind of resources into what needs to be done. It's just horrific to wake up almost weekly and sometimes weekly and hear that another person, usually a Black or brown, young man, has died while at Rikers Island. And I think that what we really need to do as socialists, as leftists, is talk about, what are the real issues here in terms of the public safety, what public safety really means. We need to take back that definition and not make people, believe that they live in fear. Yes, of course, there are, crime happens in big cities in particular. But this is a concern for me, that we are able to articulate this when we're talking to potential voters, when we're talking to people who are signing our petition. And just love for you to speak about that too, Howie.
Well, the best anti-crime program is an anti-poverty program. Mm-hmm. And, it really burns me up that the state budget just passed has no anti-poverty initiatives. There were proposals on the table for housing vouchers, strengthening them, for replenishing the excluded workers fund, which gave some of the benefits from the COVID situation to undocumented workers. Neither of those passed. And as I've talked about on this podcast, upstate New York cities are among the poorest in the country. When it comes to child poverty and family poverty, my city of Syracuse ranks number one. Rochester ranks number 1 in child poverty, number 3 in family poverty, and Buffalo ranks 6th in both. And, you go into the rural areas of the small towns that used to be industrial. This is a rust belt. And so, people are really hurting, and they turn to crime. People may have seen, it kind of went viral, a 8-year-old kid, grabbed by some cops for stealing some chips. I know who those kids are. They're second and first graders. They were riding their bikes around, and it was partly because they were hungry and partly because there's no other thing for them to do after school. That's their way of, having an adventure. There's no programs for them. And, it's endemic. And if you saw, the way the cops handled it, it looked rough. Mm-hmm. And the cops got a tough problem because what happened just happened to get on video. That happens every day here. And, instead of more cops, I mean, what are you going to do? Chase around little kids on their little bicycles stealing potato chips? Or are we going to make sure those kids have food and they have other options after school? These are children of Ethiopian immigrants, both of whom are janitors. The mother is sick. The father's working 2 shifts at the hospitals, for low wages. And these kids are running loose on the street. And that's what all these kids are doing. There's no anti-poverty program in the state. And the Democrats, who are supposed to be the more liberal party, have no anti-poverty program. It just burns me up. So, among the other things, we are saying there should be built into the tax structure in New York a guaranteed minimum income. Mm-hmm. If you're below the poverty level, you would get a monthly check or, income transferred to your account that would bring you above poverty. That's what Dr. King was talking about in the Poor People's Campaign. He said that's the most direct way. The best way to end poverty is the most direct way. The definition of poverty is you don't have enough money. And instead, they go into all these complicated things about how do you solve poverty? Like the people that are poor are the problem. And you got people like this Ethiopian immigrant father who's working 2 shifts and he's still poor, trying to raise 3 kids and a wife who got sick, probably from the work, all the chemicals they use in janitorial work and cleaning. So anyway, that's, anti-poverty is something that we're going to make it an issue. And that relates to the crime issue, mm-hmm. And the statistics on that, the Center for Economic and Policy Research just has statistics about correlation between poverty and shootings in Black communities in this country. And the poorer the community, the more shootings there are. It's real clear. So you put more cops on the street who might catch the shooters after the shot's been fired. In fact, we just had a guy killed. He was an immigrant from South Sudan, and his brother got shot and is in the hospital. And they were in a district that's sort of entertainment, restaurants, bars near downtown. And the person that fired, there were cops 20 or 30 feet away who patrol that district at night. The cops being right there couldn't stop it. So we need to get at the root causes and not pretend that hiring more cops is going to stop crime. We do want cops to answer the call, investigate crimes, find out who did them and make sure they're brought to justice. But for crime prevention, no. I mean, we just know that doesn't work. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. And what other aspects, I guess, of the Green New Deal? We talked a little bit. I think maybe talking to people about community land trust and some of the, already where that may be happening. And that's also something I think what we're looking at is how to facilitate, how to break down the barriers to be able to have more publicly owned, publicly financed, democratically decided services for people, essential services. And so public power, I know you've done a lot of work on that, Howie, and also same thing with community land trust, right? The housing issue, both in this state, obviously is very dire. And also, I think, contributes to some of the other things that we're talking about in terms of, lack of resources for people, contributing to poor health, the environmental impact of fossil fuel infrastructure, of pollution, has an impact on communities. It's been having an impact. Climate crisis has already been touching many, many communities, and it's just, continuing to get worse.
Yeah, on the housing thing, we're emphasizing there's a proposal for a just cause eviction law, good cause they call it. That may even pass this spring. We did get some, tenant legislation that improved rent control around the state, but there's more needs to be done. But the thing is, we need more affordable housing. So the private market can't just jack up prices like they are in New York. And so the federal government has I think it's called the Fair Cloth Amendment or Fairchild Amendment that says they can't build more federal units of public housing, which was just a gift to the private housing industry. But we can do it at the state level. And that's what we're proposing to do. They call it social housing instead of public housing to give it a little distinction. But that's what we need. And that's a program. It's a jobs program. It's a clean energy program. It's also a desegregation program. New York has the most segregated housing in the country, and by both race and class. So we can build these units. They're quality housing, mixed income. So like in Europe, people who live in public housing aren't just the poor people. They aren't just ghettoized in the worst part of town in projects. It's an option. It's a good housing option. And that's what we need to build. And that'll take, some years to build out the housing stock, but that starts to get at the root problem. Because right now, developers, they want to build high-end housing because they make the most profit on it. And they won't build affordable housing without subsidies. But it costs a lot more per unit to build subsidized private housing than it does to build public housing directly. So that's another issue that we're raising and the Democrats aren't, let alone the Republicans.
And of course, the segregated being most, in terms segregated in terms of housing has the impact on being the most segregated school system, public school system, because that's, that goes hand in hand, right? If you're redlining neighborhoods, if you're, segregating people in their housing, then, all the kids going to those schools are not mixing in terms of racial diversity, economic diversity, and cultural diversity.
Yeah, and that's true all over the state, Long Island to Buffalo. Well, maybe we get some questions from the chat. Here we go. Amy L. Sachs. Welcome, Gloria Matera. Since it was just Earth Day and I read Winona LaDuke's statement, tell me, has the New York Green Party been able to publicly support and or collaborate with indigenous activists in the region?
Great. In terms of specifics, I know a lot more has been done, I think, with our Green Party chapters and individuals upstate. Howie probably could speak to this and some of the things that we've done. In New York City in general, that's not really been the case that I'm familiar with. But Howie, I think, can you talk a little bit about, I think you even were arrested on one of those collaborations, right, with some of the indigenous activists in your region?
Yeah, we were in front. Well, actually, the arrest I got was with veterans, but indigenous people were supporting. It was a fight against storing natural gas and propane, gasified propane, in salt caverns next to Seneca Lake, one of these beautiful finger lakes. I mean, what could go wrong? But that's what the fossil fuel industry wanted to do. And we actually won that fight. That's one of those fossil fuel infrastructure fights we won. And over the years, the Onondagas are very concerned about the environment. They're the ones that live in a territory right next to Syracuse, New York. And their land claim, they didn't want to, push people off that were on their own land that they were entitled to. They just wanted to have a say, particularly on development for environmental reasons. And unfortunately, their case was thrown out of court. The judges said, you're too late, which is ridiculous, given the history, and I won't go into it, of what happened to the different Haudenosaunee or Iroquois nations here. And we were talking the other day we got a second Buffalo billion. If you heard about the first Buffalo billion, went to people like Elon Musk and Tesla and didn't develop what was promised. Now we got another Buffalo billion going to the Buffalo Bills, the football team, to build a new stadium. The owner made his money in fracking. He's a $6 billion. He has $6 billion in wealth. He wants $1.5 billion for a new stadium. He could pay for it himself, or he's got the collateral to borrow the money and pay it off over time from the revenues that the new stadium is supposed to bring in. But the governor is from the Buffalo area, and You know, the elites there want it and they want the state to pay for it, the rest of us. Now, what happened was the Senecas, who have a casino, had a dispute with the state and was holding in escrow $600 million, you know, about almost, not quite half of what that's going to cost. And this thing was still being adjudicated in the courts. The Seneca did lose the decision, but there was more to be done. And the governor seized those funds and dedicated it to the stadium. So the Senecas are angry. And there are issues all over the state, particularly with respect to the environment. And
actually, you and I talked about, sorry to interrupt, we talked about connecting with some of the leaders there around this issue, and when we started the campaign. And so
yeah, and I think we will.
Right. And I want to thank Amy for mentioning, I didn't get to read Winona LaDuke's statement yet, but it is in my email. And of course, she, you know, ran wrong with Ralph Nader as a Green Party vice presidential candidate, but she's been continuing to do, you know, good work around that. So thanks for reminding me about that statement, Amy.
Scout Trooper 164, how would you improve education in New York? You want to start with that?
Well, I think first thing is this push towards charter schools, that, you know, the kinds of charter schools. Going back a little, I started out in education as a special ed teacher. In those days, charter schools were really community schools. They were started by the parents and teachers in communities that didn't have schools that were really, you know, available and catering to what their kids needed, right? So they were kind of grassroots, you know, in the way that you might look at workers' co-ops or other kinds of community-led enterprises. You know, now what we have are, you know, corporate charter schools. Continuing with just Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York City, just gave $50 million for summer school programs in New York City just for kids who attend charter schools. You know, this kind of separating and saying that, you know, a corporate run, you know, backed charter schools are going to be improving education because our public schools are bad, you know, is just really doublespeak and, you know, making parents who want the best for their kids to go to the best possible school. So first of all, the other thing is kind of desegregating housing. So continuing to be able to have these vibrant, mixed economy, mixed use neighborhoods, where then the neighborhood schools are, you know, a replica of that, right? It's more funding for public education. The funding is out there in the state. You know, we would be readjusting how taxes are done. You know, obviously the stock transfer tax that we've talked about. You know, the correct money has to be there to be able to do those resources. Like in, you know, my area, it's just kind of shameful that, you know, down the street there's a, you know, top public school in a high income neighborhood, but in the same district, because of the way the housing changes, there are not the same resources in schools. And I also think, you know, the priorities are kind of crazy. There's participatory budgeting. Participatory budgeting is a great way for the community to be involved in, like, improving things. Where do we want our parks? You know, what other kinds of things do we want for our community? Instead, what I see is people saying, like, we need new bathrooms in PS 52. Like, you know, these are capital projects and improvements that need to be funded by the city, by the state, by the federal government. I don't know how, if you want to tag on to that.
Yeah, well, the Green Party in New York has really been strong on education. It's an issue that really is not one that we were emphasizing so much, but it became a big movement. The resistance to high stakes testing, the privatization of schools at the expense, and by that I mean charter schools at the expense of public schools, co-location of charter schools and public school buildings where the charter school gets the better part of the resources in those buildings. All this is going on, and this is part of a nationwide push by the right wing to destroy public education and privatize it, so the rich people can control who gets an education, who doesn't, and what's in the content of that education. And also because of, and I won't go into the whole analysis, but because of a capitalism with overproduction, there are not many profitable opportunities in production. So they want to grab as much as they can of the $600 billion a year public revenue stream going to public schools. So there's that. Because of our strong stance, we've been endorsed by 1 year 6 local teachers union. The Buffalo teachers endorsed us again in 2018. We were 6 in 2014, despite the state federation, what do they call it? NYSA, New York State United Teachers. That's the state federation of teachers locals. They explicitly said, don't take a position in 2014 and endorsed Cuomo in 2018. But we still had a local defy the state federation and endorse our green ticket in 2018. So, we've got recognition for that. And yeah, when it comes to funding the schools, the property tax is unevenly distributed. We want to make most of it come from the state income tax, which is progressive, and everybody who has an income pays it, and then distributed according to a fair formula, so that with adjustments for the schools that have been neglected for years, so they can catch up in terms of their physical plant and their teaching staff. So yeah, there's a lot to be done there. And then of course, desegregation. We have called for controlled choice where people can choose their schools within a district and new districts. So like Syracuse, all the people of color in the city proper, and sometimes just a block away in a suburb, you got a school, much better funded, physical plant, and it's almost all white. And so we need to redraw the district lines so we can desegregate. And then, people can choose what schools they want to go to. And controlled choice is a combination of making sure the schools are racially balanced as well as people getting their choices. We need to do things like that if we're serious about desegregation, because desegregating housing is going to take a long time. It's taken, a century to build it up, because we're more segregated now by housing than we were a century ago, than we were in 1980, probably than we were 20 years ago. It just keeps getting worse. And, so we need to redraw the districts and have this controlled choice program. So, the kids are going to schools that have, a good balance socioeconomically. Actually, you can't use race. You got to use socioeconomic, but that's corresponds a lot to race. So you do get the racial integration as well.
Mm-hmm. And the underutilization of schools in terms of the building and as a central point for communities, community centers. I went to after school program all the time in public school, and that's not so available anymore for kids. The playground is closed. The lock is on the playground gates on the weekends.
Frankly, I was raised by, city recreation programs that were running in schools, because my mother died when I was young and my father was working. And so I got more direction from, those young men, and it's almost all young men at that time. I was in the sports, so that's where I was. The kids don't have that today. They're on their bicycles running around stealing chips for thrills and because they're hungry. Frankie Lee, Howie and Gloria, do you have a district by district strategy to win the governor's race?
Well, right now we have a district by, county by county, congressional district by congressional districts to get 45,000 valid signatures by having, people, both volunteer and paid petitioners kind of around the state, doing that petitioning. But do we have it? It's. I'll let Howie speak to this. This is his fourth statewide run, only my second. But it is a challenge to run a statewide campaign on the kind of not only limited resources. Green Party takes no corporate donations, but also the media blackout, which I think those of you who have been following Howie since his presidential run and then the last gubernatorial run know that it's the media blackout is getting more and more prevalent, both to protect the status quo, but also because there's not a lot of independent media. Even these small community papers, at least in my area, are being bought up and kind of run by Schneps and other places. They're not the same. They're almost the same community paper in every single community. But I'll pass it over to Howie.
Yeah, well, the district by district strategy on the petition is we need to get at least 500 good signatures in half the congressional districts. So we have districts like my district centered around Syracuse, the one in Rochester. I know people are out today, maybe Buffalo, Albany. But most of them are going to be New York City, because one thing about New York City is a lot of foot traffic. Unlike, like my city, the downtown looks like a movie set. It's just dead. I mean, in the middle of business day, even at lunchtime, there's hardly anybody on the street. There's just not much. It's just the businesses have left, and you got some government people, and that's about it. So we got that district by district. And then when it comes to, mobilizing the vote, I mean, New York's a big state. It's got nearly 20 million people, probably 12 or 13 million voters. So I think what we'll do is what we've been doing is encourage our locals who are organized by county to do district by district canvassing within their area. And if somebody's in a new area and wants to work with a campaign, we'll teach them how to do that. We just don't have the capacity to do a ground game that covers the whole state. And then on the media, it really, when Trump got in there, a lot of liberal media, they're under the impression that the Greens take away votes from Democrats. And we're trying, but the fact is most of our voters won't vote if we're not on the ballot. They don't like the Democrats or the Republicans. Mm-hmm. We know that from an exit poll for Jill Stein in 2016 about that presidential election. 61% of Stein voters told the exit posters they would have stayed home if she wasn't on the ballot. So we bring new voters to the polls more than anything else. But
I do think in the areas where, as you said, Howie, Green locals, where they're active and where we've been working, along with others in coalition on certain issues, are the places probably to concentrate. As we said, we can't cover every place in the state, but, in the areas here in New York City where we've been fighting against, a power plant or, something else, and things happening in other areas, that's where we hope that the activists and the organizers we've been working with on the issues see that helping us to be able to get on the ballot, stay on the ballot, and get, the votes that we need to continue to be a party that gets on the ballot, that has their ballot line, that we need to come out strong, because those issues get lost after once the primary's over, and usually most places the Democrat kind of sails into the general election. No one's talking, even if you have the most left candidate challenging in the Democratic primary. Once that person is summarily dismissed, and we know that happens, the issues that we've been talking about today, and we've been talking about in the Green Party, will just not be raised.
And I think another piece of this is we define win not as win the office, but we come out of this stronger than we went in. The better percentage we get, the more leverage we have going forward, like that 5% we got in 2014 did give us leverage. In fact, Gloria was in a meeting with the EPA director to want to know, or what they call DEC in New York, Department of Environmental Conservation. They wanted to know what we thought about climate policy and energy policy. And Governor Cuomo crashed it for a minute. Maybe you can tell people more about that. But the fact is that 5%, people were listening to what we had to say at that time. With Trump in office, I mean, it was really tough in 2018. Mm-hmm. I had people who had phone bank for us, giving us money, who said, I got to vote for Cuomo, as much as I hate him, to get at Trump. Now we got to support the Democrats to fight the Trump fascists. Well, how did that work out? The Democrats have both houses in Congress. They can't get voting rights laws passed. They can't stop the Democrats in about 20 states from setting it up so they can steal elections. The Democrats can't fight the fascists. It's a choice between, neoliberal corporate Democrats and neo-fascist corporate Republicans, or a progressive party on the left. I mean, I think that's an argument we got to make to people. Mm-hmm. Make your vote count. And as I was saying during the presidential campaign, you vote for Biden, you get lost in the sauce. If you're for Medicare for all or a Green New Deal, nobody knows that vote, because Biden was opposed to those things. You vote for the Greens, at least that's a vote for Medicare for all, Green New Deal. The more votes we get, the more leverage we have. So we're not expecting to win the office. We're running against two corporate parties with tens of millions of dollars to spend. We'll be doing good if we get a couple 100,000. And, we'll do the best we can with that. So that's just the reality, but that doesn't mean we can't win in the terms we define.
And there's certainly ways that, those of you listening now or may tune into this later can help. So obviously, if you're in New York, and a registered voter here, we'd love for you to get a petition. You can go to gpny.org to get that. If you want to help out and contact us, we may have a couple of paid petition openings still going. If you'd like to apply, you can also do that at gpny.org. And of course, particularly today, to give me some birthday love to get on the ballot along with my comrade Howie, you can donate hawkinsmatera.org/donate.
Yeah, definitely. All the money, just about all of it's going to petitioning until the end of May. We're paying our paid petitioners $20 an hour. You can't pay by the signature in New York. That's against the law here. So we're paying, the minimum wage or the minimum wage in New York City is $15 now. And the Greens were fighting for that. And, we got 5% in Cuomo. Implemented a graduation toward 15, which they've now reached a lot slower than we would have liked. Upstate, we're still at $13.50, so we haven't even reached that. So, we're paying a decent wage given the circumstances here, but we definitely need those paid petitioners. So anything you can give, 65 is a good number, today. But whatever you can give, we really need and would appreciate. And you see the webpage is live. I don't know if we mentioned that, so you can read about our platform and more about our biographies. And we got a section there about the original Green New Dealers, which has links to a lot of the leaflets and videos and news releases and articles about us campaigning for a Green New Deal in 2010. I'm sick and tired of these journalists saying it started with AOC. We actually know where she got it from. She got it from VG Ramos, who was running a Green city council candidate who was using the state, stuff we'd done to run for a city council race. So we're not so worried about the credit. We're just angry that they watered down the program and made it a kind of neoliberal corporate welfare program instead of a eco-socialist public program. So Violet at Content Boutique, I got an email from AOC yesterday saying that the Green New Deal is here in New York City communities. What is that? I've been out petitioning. I saw that same email because I'm on her list. And I don't know what she's exactly referring to. There is some stuff going on in New York. There's some building retrofitting going on. They're starting to build offshore, the offshore wind, not as much and as fast as we would like. There's support for solar and wind, both farms and smaller applications. But again, it's the smaller applications, only those people that are, wealthy enough to be able to afford the initial investment up front or qualify then for a tax credit can do that. Lower income people, it's just beyond their reach unless we get we finance it through public power companies or a public bank so they can finance it over time. And the savings between the fuel you're saving for gas or heating propane or heating oil and what you pay for electricity for the heat pumps, that's how you can finance it over time. But there's no banking system that will make those loans unless we do it through public banks.
Yeah, I think that, I haven't seen that. I got off her list. Maybe I need to get back on AOC's list just so I know what she's talking about. Since she's not the original Green New Dealer, but there are laws being passed, there are improvements being made, right? There's kind of like the environmental and the social justice, the environmental justice activists and organizations on the ground have, been pulling and tugging and getting some of the more progressive Democrats to speak up about things. But the pace is painfully slow. It's, we've talked, I'm not sure if you, on your last podcast, Howie, if the IPC report was out, but it is, every report, and they tend to be a little on the conservative side, is more dire, is more tragic. And so I think what we're talking about when we talk about things being public power, public banks, kind of taking it. Everything seems to be being done slowly, too incremental, and too still based in the kind of private industry corporate model. The public-private partnership kind of work that goes on.
And they've been planning the transition to clean energy since the last Republican governor, Pataki, in 2005. And a lot of times they never even meet their deadlines, and we never get the work that was done. In the current planning to being done under the Community Leadership and Community Protection Act, the weaker bill that passed in 2018, it's now 4 years later. They still don't have a plan. They're having hearings on their plan. They're having one here in Syracuse next week. I'm gonna go there and petition. I'm not gonna waste my breath telling them what to do because they're, industry's got the inside track with them. Another thing, the difference between what we were advocating and what the, Working Families Party compromise with Cuomo was, when they talk about, disadvantaged communities participating in the process, their legislation said organizations that represent disadvantaged communities. You know who that is? It's the middle-class people that run the NGOs. It's not the people in those communities. Our bill was very clear that you had to live in the neighborhood, and there was a process for making sure those people were accountable to the community. So the planning process that we proposed was much more democratic. I went through the point by point on that in a long article called "Does the Climate Movement Really Mean What It Says?" It was in Counterpunch a few years ago. You can look it up. And I took that task, for example, Bill McKibben, who backed the compromise bill, that Cuomo got behind with the 450 parts per million in the preface of it. That's what I meant. That's what gave me the title. Does Bill McKibben and the broader climate movement really mean what they say when it comes to deciding what they're going to support? And you know what their rationale is? I understand it. Well, this is what the Democrats are willing to do, so we can only do what they're willing to do instead of demanding real solutions.
And so New York City, she may be talking about, they just passed something called Local Law 97, which is supposedly a fairly, aggressive effort to reduce carbon emissions, mostly focusing on buildings here in New York City. So we'll take a look at that, Howie, and we'll basically talk about how we can improve on that and speed up that process, because I'm sure that it's an effort and people are happy that it was passed, but, it'd be interesting to know how that's going to happen. Private contracts, how slow is the rollout? Let's see what that's about. But, we're not about saying because somebody came up with a bill or something was passed and, it's trash, right? We acknowledge things that are being done. But when it's being done in the context of really kind of corporatized method, under a capitalist system, we know that the profit, right, is going to be first. What shareholders are getting, the kickbacks are happening, the lines of politicians' pockets. We know that then somewhere the costs have got to be cut for really implementing these programs and these services.
Yeah, and I talk about the steel industry and the cement industry being so important for the transition to 100% clean energy and zero emissions. There's nothing in the state, law that passed dealing with industry, let alone because, just use steel as an example. There was a good article in The Intercept last week you can look up about green hydrogen and steel, green hydrogen being the way to make steel cleanly. And there's a quote in there from a steel executive saying, coke ovens are here to stay. Coke is a derivative of coal. Enormous carbon emitters. I mean, the only way to get the steel industry, I believe, to get the technology to the clean technology of green hydrogen and electric arc furnaces is to take them over as public enterprises and shut down the coke ovens as we build the green hydrogen ovens. And then do the scrap metal with electric arc furnaces, which the industry is slowly moving toward, but their time scale is too slow to deal with the climate crisis. That's why we need, this eco-socialist approach, and why we're calling the Green New Deal now the eco-socialist Green New Deal, because we got to make a distinction from what, how the Democrats have not just watered down and slowed down but they're doing a totally different kind of program. It's not even, a New Deal program, which did use some public enterprise. One example, I may have mentioned it on this podcast, but the Civilian Climate Corps, they're doing it in a privatized way. The Civilian Conservation Corps in the New Deal was a public agency. They hired the people and they planned the projects across the nation in a coordinated way to do conservation. Now we want to do climate remediation. But the way they're going to do it is they're going to run through AmeriCorps, which will put out requests for proposals. Private organizations will put in their grant proposals, and then AmeriCorps will pick them. But it's not coordinated, and the people are being employed by private entities, not a public agency that could have better control over labor standards and wages and so forth. So that's just another example of where the Democrats have taken a privatized approach to these public policies that's inappropriate. Steve Talbot, how does the Green Party support non-urban people? We got a Green New Deal for agriculture. And what that involves is supporting with subsidies and technical assistance the transition from chemicalized, highly fertilized, highly pesticide using agriculture to organic, regenerative agriculture that rebuilds the soils. We get corporations out of owning farms, which they're doing more and more. I mean, the biggest farm owners now are private equity firms on Wall Street. Bill Gates is a big owner of farms. Farmers are becoming like tenant farmers like they were in the Gilded Age when the populist movement rose. So then we want the farm to go to the farmers. If they don't have land, we can have public land trusts in this case for farmers to, rent the land so they can farm without necessarily have to raise the capital to buy the land themselves. Or we can have help financing that. And then we need to support their income with parity pricing and supply management. So the markets are regulated and farmers are guaranteed a living income above their cost of production. And then the other piece of it is the rural towns. We can strategically locate the food processing and other manufacturing using agricultural feedstocks in these towns. Upstate New York needs it. These towns have lost their factories. They're depressed, and it's still an agricultural region. So, with public direction, we can bring those manufacturing jobs using agricultural feedstocks back to our communities. So I think that's a lot better than, Republicans are getting the rural vote now, basically by scapegoating immigrants. We're actually out there picking the crops. It's crazy. And one other thing, just since I mentioned immigrants, studies show that if we're going to go to organic regenerative agriculture, we're going to need 1 million new farmers in this country. A lot of those people coming from Central America are farmers. Their American dream, is to be a farmer here. So we have the new farmers we need. We just need to, let them in and get to work.
I think we should also make a point though about Black farmers, so in addition to obviously needing new farmers, and that's a great place for us to offer new people coming in, also to create situations, resources, priorities, and programs to really increase the population of Black farmers. There's quite a bit being done by actually several Greens are talking about that. Omawali Adewale has been putting that into practice in Sullivan County, and really kind of spearheading some of that work.
Yeah, and the Southern Black farmers won in court reparations from the Department of Agriculture back, I think during the Obama administration, and it's been very slow coming out. Still hasn't come all the way out. They're still complaining, and they're losing their farms in the meantime. I mean, this is Jim Crow in farming, and the Department of Agriculture has been terrible. And even though we're running for state office, that's something that we're cognizant of. And what Omawali's doing in New York, part of our agricultural program should be to help people like Omawali. That we have people, Southern people, in Syracuse, Black people that used to have farms down south, and they moved north to get industrial jobs. Now the industrial jobs are going back, but they have community gardens. They they might prefer farming. So we should, and I do know some black farmers upstate that, I actually know several, and they just need the support, and that's something we should provide.
Great.
Steve Pabbott, if working people spend most of their time working, how can they participate in Green Party efforts, especially when their employers are generally not supportive? Well, we need to, lower the working hours with no loss in pay. That's a whole nother program that
Mhm.
you need to have a tax source, so you pay people a second income, basically their share of social productivity gains, so they would have more time. That's a demand that's been on the table since the 30s, 30 hours work for
30-hour work week without reduction in pay. Many of us know that slogan, but it wasn't just a slogan. It's actually about quality of life for people.
And sharing the productivity gains, because what's happened since about 1970 is all the productivity gains have gone to the ownership class, and wages have been stagnant for what they call the golden age in the late 40s, 50s, and almost to the end of the 60s. Wages and productivity grew in tandem. And then in 1970, there was a profit squeeze and then a corporate offensive against unions and workers. And they've been able to keep our wages largely frozen while productivity kept going up. And if you have a way of having a broad-based tax to fund the second wage to cover those 10 hours that you wouldn't be working, so you get your pay, you get 30 hours work, but 40 hours pay.
Right.
That's a way of doing it. Because if we leave it in the hands of corporations, they're going to keep exploiting us more and more. And our wages will be stagnant, barely able to survive on them, and they'll take all the profits.
And Steve, that's why we're appreciative of anyone who donates, volunteers, whether it's in the street petition, whether it's phone banking, or even just on social media, getting the word out about the Green Party, about our campaigns, because we know working people or people who would like to be working, but are not able to, or people who would like to work but they're doing caregiving, whether it's for the very young in their family or the very old or the ill, right? And those are people that should be paid a living wage also. And so we're always appreciative that it's the working class, it's the students, it's the seniors that are supporting these kinds of campaigns and efforts.
Lana Dell, both major parties suck. Dump the incumbents. But in order to do that, we need to vote in our primaries, which sometimes means temporary re-registering as Democrat or Republican. Vote third party in general, get these corrupt incumbents out. A lot of people do that. I don't recommend it. I think we should put all our efforts into building a real party of the people, the Green Party. The Democrats have been around, it's the oldest party in the world. And there's no way that corporate interests that control it are going to give it up. So instead of playing that game inside their party, we should put all our efforts into, voting in their primaries. No, we should be organizing for our candidates. And, we have primaries where we have ballot status sometimes. So that's a reason to register green where you can do that in those states. But don't give legitimacy to these two parties. I think, Bernie Sanders is probably the best of the progressive, or people call themselves democratic socialists. It's really kind of New Deal liberalism. But, he makes the Democrats look better than they are. Because whose programs are getting passed now? It's not Bernie Sanders. It's, what Biden wanted to do, and even that is passing. Because they won't lift the filibuster. And it's not just Sinema and Manchin. There's probably 8 or 9 senators who quietly want to keep the filibuster. So I just think, put all your efforts into building the Green Party. Eric Gray, I'm considering running for office here in Florida as an independent. So I'm curious what localized eco-socialist plan looks like. Well, I'll just say there's a Green Party in Florida. I hope you're going to run as a Green, Eric. But you want to say anything about local Green New Deal, Gloria?
I think some of the things we talked about, Eric, might be, obviously looking where you're running for office may be very different than, running where we're running. But, I think the ideas of public power, right? Public power generation, the housing, right? Desegregation of housing and the, public school systems there. Be nice to know kind of what might be happening. Are you thinking about running like locally more, like a city council, as opposed to over a statewide office? So what are some, I'm sure there are some environmental issues that are close to home, but I think anything around public power, housing are really important. I don't know what the housing situation there is. We certainly can put you in touch with the Green Party in Florida. You can look them up. Even if you still decide you want to be independent of any party, I think you'll find that the work that they're doing and the issues that they're promoting sound like they're going to be closer to, what you'd like to do as an independent.
Yeah, I would just add that another thing you can make as part of your, platform is for local office or state office is that there should be a planning process to get to 100% clean energy and zero emissions in, your city or your state as soon as possible. And because of the way the tax system works, city and state budgets have to be balanced. You can't borrow the money. Well, you can borrow some of it, but you can't run unbalanced budgets to do this. That's why once you got a local or state plan, then you demand that the federal government provide the resources to finish the plan that you can't do with local resources. And the other thing I think is strategic place to aim your efforts at is the planning board or planning agency. If you're lucky, you have a planning department in your city. That should be a place where the public plans and bids out the projects. What tends to happen now is developers show up and the planning board or agency rubber stamps what they want to do. There's a hearing and, 99 times out of 100, their proposal gets approved. So you have uncoordinated planning and, they're not, most of them leaders in, build green buildings and so forth. So you got to reverse that. So, take over and democratize the planning process. And then you can begin doing green development or redevelopment.
Right. And let's not leave out what I'm sure Howie's talked about on his shows before, which is ranked choice voting, because that's catching on in some cities. And, you can do that on a citywide, right? It doesn't have to be the whole state. It's efforts in cities that have been able to do that in several places. And so, we've been trying to work on that here too, in New York State, New York City.
And ranked choice voting for multi-member districts for your legislative bodies, so you get proportional representation. That's the real game changer.
Right.
And I've said this before, but see somebody just mentioned Australian Greens in the chat. But in Australia, they have ranked choice voting by single-member districts for the House. So the Greens have 1 out of 151 seats in the House because they got one district where they're the majority after the ranked choices. And they get about 10% of the vote for the House nationwide. In the Senate, there's 7 multi-member districts, and the Greens have, I think, 7 or 9 out of 63, close to 10%, which is their city nationwide vote. So you see the difference. If you just have single-member districts for ranked choice voting for legislative bodies, you're not going to change much. If you get multi-member districts, then you're going to get proportional representation, and that's the game changer because then the Greens will get their fair share of representation in government. And then things will really have to change because to get anything passed, we'll have enough votes that they're going to have to deal with us.
Mm-hmm.
And, Greens are in government all over the world because most systems are proportional, like the Australian Senate or the German Bundestag, most countries. And that's why we get as big a vote, if not bigger vote, than a lot of the European Greens in other parts of the world, but we don't get representation that we're due, especially at higher offices. We do have over 100 people elected to local office around the country, A lot of people don't realize that. They only hear about us when we run, candidates for president.
Mhm.
But that's because they don't live in an area where there is local greens. But that's our emphasis. And so I urge you, Eric, to run, and good luck. And, we'll help all we can. So Gloria, the manager behind the screen, let's go extra half hour.
They certainly did. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was a good discussion.
Mhm.
And, just to wrap up, I want to, okay, we got the donate URL there. This is a good day to donate. It's Gloria's birthday. She just got her Medicare card, and do a little research. You can figure out how old she is. And we're saying, make a guess, and $65 would be a great donation appropriate on this day. But as we say, whatever you can afford, if it's more or less, we welcome it and we need it. And any last word from you, Gloria?
Just thank you for having me on, Howie. I'm excited to run with you again. Really appreciate those people who are tuning in and any support we get, no matter how. Push us out on social media as the campaign ramps up. If you're not in New York and can't help out petitioning or from voting, I want to thank Howie's team behind the scenes for producing this show, and hope to be back again. But we will see you on independent media and in the streets. Stay strong, comrades.
All right.